Welcome to Leaders Creating Ruckus, where we explore how disrupting the status quo can create long-lasting opportunities. I am your host, Aashi Arora. I'm an executive coach where I help professionals learn how to rise in leadership. I bring to my clients as well as to my listening audience over 20 years of leadership experience, and I'm excited to share all that I can. So if you're searching for ways to get noticed for the next promotion, wanting to launch your own business, or integrate work better into your life, then tune in each week. I promise you will hear from amazing leaders who have so many pearls of wisdom to give us. And one of these amazing leaders is here with us today, Kim Jones. Before rising to Divisional Chief Information Officer at Farmers Insurance Company, Kim held multiple executive level roles at Fortune 250 companies over her 25-year career. She now coaches leaders to reach their highest professional potential, focusing on working with professional women seeking to rise in leadership ranks. Kim also provides career coaching to women looking to make greater impact through their work, is a speaker on core 21st century leadership skills, and is a gender equity advisor to companies committed to fostering the advancement and well-being of women in work. Kim is a mentor to high potential women in IT and serves as faculty for the Women in Leadership through the Irvine Technology Corporation. She's credentialed through the International Coaching Federation and holds an MA in anthropology, an MBA, and a bachelor's in psychology, along with a Women in Leadership certificate from the Yale School of Management. My goodness, Kim, with all those credentials, so happy to have you here on our show. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Aashi. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a privilege to be here, and I always love our conversation. So I'm really looking forward to diving into some topics with you today.
Well, I am extremely grateful, coming off of Thanksgiving and this time period. I have to say I'm super grateful to have gotten to really get to know you well over the last couple of years and, gotten to see different aspects of your leadership journey. So now what I'd like to do is start off with helping our listeners learn a little bit more about you and your background. So where'd you grow up, Kim?
Well, I actually grew up, most of my life has been in Southern California. I grew up in Simi Valley, Ventura County, and have been in Ventura County since I was a kid, but I was actually born in Germany to parents who are American citizens. So when we were, me and my brothers were around seven-ish, I was seven, they were slightly older and younger. My parents were trying to figure out if they wanted to raise us there or here. So we came to California, my parents being both Midwesterners. And why I like to mention that in my background is because I think that really sort of spurred my interest in different perspectives and in the ways that cultures impact how we operate and show up in the world. Being later a cultural anthropologist and someone who cares deeply about equity issues, I think those early learnings of what it means to go from one culture to another in very different contexts was very formative for me. But yeah, I currently live in Camarillo, California, and love it here.
Wow, thanks for explaining that background. I'm curious because this is a term I haven't heard very often, so I'm guessing many of our listeners may also be unaware of what is a cultural anthropologist.
A cultural anthropologist. So if you think about seeing the person in the khakis with, the notepad sitting amongst a tribe of people who are ethnically very different, taking notes and trying to fit in, that is actually a trope of what a cultural anthropologist is. But let me see if I explain what we actually do. Cultural anthropologists are interested in understanding the effect that culture has on the ways that people behave, the ways that they think, the ways that power systems are set up. And the way that they do that is they immerse themselves into cultures that are very different than their own, and through getting a different cultural perspective can actually start to see the dynamics that occur within their own culture. And it's interesting because cultural anthropology actually has a very long history that mostly includes anthropologists immersing themselves in exotic cultures that are foreign to the native culture. but more and more there's application for cultural anthropology within the society that the anthropologist grew up in. So as an example, there's a huge application for anthropology now in business, where business is looked at sort of in a cultural context as the field site, where an anthropologist might look at, from an outsider's perspective, what are the norms, what are the values, what are the dynamics that are happening within an organization, to really start to solve complex business problems from more of that qualitative perspective. So an example might be, when I was working for Farmers Insurance, we were trying to get behind why agents weren't cross-selling policies. So rather than selling multiple policies to a single customer, they tended to stay with one product. And it didn't matter how much we were incentivizing them or rewarding them. What was happening was a little bit of this monoline practice. And so we were actually talking to some anthropologists about going out into the agent offices to understand their practices and how there might be some underlying dynamics that were disincentivizing them from doing the multi-line sales process. So that would be an example of where, as a company, if you have a lot of data that you're analyzing to try to understand what's going on with your customers or your employees or your products, you may not get the same kinds of answers as if you go out and actually live the experience of your employees or your customers, to really understand how they are experiencing your products or your services. So that's where anthropologists really have started to make significant inroads into a lot of different contexts that have nothing to do with the ways that we used to think about anthropology.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, this is the first time I've really thought about anthropology in the business context.
Yeah.
I definitely have, I know I've had conversations with you about anthropology in the coaching context, but really in the business operations, culture kind of context, that's really quite fascinating. I'm curious, what happened? What did they discover?
We actually didn't bring them in.
Okay.
But yeah, I should say that was a challenge that was successfully addressed through a number of different initiatives that the company took. But I thought what was so interesting was the company's creativity, that Farmers' creativity that it was using, really exploring different avenues for how we could get behind some of what we were seeing play out that didn't logically make sense from, a data perspective.
So walk us through how you went from studying psychology and anthropology and ended up growing in the leadership ranks in the world of IT.
Yeah. So I do also have an MBA. So I should say that was probably the phase of my life where I deviated away from the things that were most resonant for me. So what I mean by that is I got my undergraduate in psychology. I had planned to be a psychologist, but then I got very spooked because of all of the narratives that were out there about how psychologists struggled, and it was super competitive. This is back in the late 80s and early 90s, when that was a super competitive field. So I actually followed advice and stopped listening to my own voice about what was going to make me happy career-wise, and did the thing that many, many, many people do.
Yes.
Abandon what they really, the life that they really want to build, in favor of security and prestige and sort of that kind of safe path. So I switched from psychology, went and got my MBA, and actually had every intention of rising through the leadership ranks of corporations. And it's kind of funny to think about now, because the reason that was so appealing to me is I was working at the time for Dole Food Company. It was my first real job out of college. And I used to watch these executives walking into conference rooms in their suits and their, notebooks, with assistants following them in, and people bringing in lunches and coffee, coming out with these big, important decisions having been made. And I thought, that looks really cool. I think that would be great. I'd love to have sort of that kind of influence and power within an organization. So I was motivated really by more of an image than an actual understanding of what that kind of job required, which obviously I learned on my own journey up to the divisional CIO position that I had when I left the corporate world. But my leadership journey was really one of, it was never, sort of along the lines of me pursuing my MBA. I never consciously chose the path necessarily. I more listened to advice and matched what I thought I could be good at with that advice. So often I was more responding to opportunities and guidance than I was to my own internal compass. And through that process, because I was very good at business and I was very good at understanding how to navigate in those kinds of environments and get things done and lead people. So all of those things came pretty easily for me, not easily, but they were skills that I was able to develop effectively.
Sure.
I sort of kept rising until finally I was realizing that a lot of my goals to keep rising and to sort of switch from different functional responsibilities within a company was being driven more by the fact that I wasn't happy and I was trying to find the job.
Gosh, that's so relatable. Right? That's so relatable, right? And we hear this from I've got to say, especially women leaders who are just, they think they've arrived at a position and they're like, okay, this is it. I'm going to feel happy. And it's like, oh, I'm not happy. Next time, got to jump to the next thing and next thing and next thing. And you're looking for something, but you haven't really defined what it really is.
Absolutely. And that is really where I ended up, was in burnout and dissatisfaction, and having a very large job that felt like it was literally sucking the life out of me. And it was at that point that I finally decided to do something about it, because prior to that, I had just reacted by trying to fix something either in the external environment that I was in the companies that I worked for, or something internally with me where I thought, well, I just need to make a shift and be happy with what I have. And I don't even know if I consciously put words when I left to the predicament I was in. At the time, it was burnout and I needed a break, and I knew I needed to do something different. But much later, as I was reflecting back on that time, what I realized was that I was trying to solve a problem that was because of a misalignment in the life that I, had sort of the kind of life I wanted to be living and the kind of life that I had actually built. And so there was a lot of pulling up roots and trial and error and experimentation, and really finding my way through a very, very difficult time, because I had been so mono-focused on the life that I was creating that I found myself in a position of saying, I don't know anything else but this. And it was weird, because now I can say the story of like, well, I came up through psychology and that was what I would have really liked to have done. And I gave it up. But at the time, to me, it was, it was more like, I don't know what I want. Wasn't even connecting like, well, maybe there's some things, some clues back from my younger years. So it was so buried that it just took some time to really surface what those areas of interest for me were. And then my degree in cultural anthropology actually came as a result of looking at options and opportunities for anthropologists in business. And so that was sort of the entry into, well, I'll do something more like this. But that ended up just being sort of a slight left turn on a path that required a sharp left turn. Yeah.
But I mean, still, I gotta really applaud you for that bravery and identifying that, even though for many looking from the outside in would go, oh my gosh, you've got like the dream job, you're in this executive role, you're so well respected, you're doing so well in it. Why would you leave that? And you identifying that, well, it's not purposeful for me. It's not what I'm passionate about. It's not, I'm not, something doesn't feel right. And then wanting to take that time to explore it? I mean, at the time, like you said, you didn't really know it. You just knew you were burnt out from it, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
And that's why now I'm so passionate about being, say, partnering with women who are starting their own journeys of exploring how they can better align their work with what they feel is the impact that they want to make in the world. I sort of was feeling my way through the dark, and when I had made it through to the other side, there were so many things that I looked back and thought, wow, if I'd have known this at this time, or if someone had been there to tell me that this is a pretty normal process of major human transformation, and that if you feel like you've lost your identity, or you feel really uncertain about what you're going to do, or you feel emotionally like not yourself, like those are all normal things. I thought there was something really wrong at the
yeah.
time, and I didn't quite know how to solve it other than to say I can't go back to what I was doing before. And now, what's so important for me is to normalize this process for people who I believe are, more inclined now to make these kinds of changes post-COVID, where they're really thinking seriously about their careers and about how they want to build their lives to bring the kind of meaning that they're looking for, is really helping people understand that that is a common, if not often talked about, process that people go through who decide that it's more important to build the life that they want than to stay in a situation that's pretty good, but not giving them ultimately what they want to contribute.
Wow, building the life that they want. Very powerful. So tell us about how you went from cultural anthropology to coaching.
Yeah. Well, so here's the story on that one. When I left my corporate job, I was absolutely convinced that I needed to. I hadn't yet let go of this idea that I needed to be somehow viewed as important and credible out in the world. And so I thought, whatever I do next is going to have some component of social credibility and prestige associated with it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go do this cultural anthropology. I'm going to open my own consulting firm, and I'm going to work with companies who are looking to build high performing cultures. I was really interested in the power dynamics that tended to create the inequitable environments that people in marginalized groups experience. And
Mm.
I am and was very motivated to have an impact in that area. And I thought this would be the avenue for me to do that. I finished my degree in December of 2019, right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I launched my business in January of 2020, and I felt so much resistance to opening this consulting practice. And it
Mm.
actually really scared me because of the,
Internal resistance or external
yes,
resistance? Yeah.
internal resistance.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel this. I'm back to, like, I took 3 years off to find work that would be fulfilling to me. And now I'm feeling like, kind of at the end of a vacation, like dragging yourself back to work. And it was such a moment of I would say, uh, high concern for me, because I didn't understand what was happening. And I was explaining it to myself in ways where I was saying, well, maybe you just don't want to work anymore. You got so burned out that, you're not going to be able to go back, or
Mhm.
maybe you just hate working now that you've
All these voices in the head.
yes, there's all these reasons why I was not, why this was not the fit for me. But then what I realized when COVID happened and I decided to put that business on hold to reevaluate, and that was so scary, because it was like, well, wait a second, I've been working on this for 3 years. Why is this still a problem? What I ended up realizing was that I would be going back to serve the same power system that I had been under for, and we all
Ah,
are in corporate
interesting.
America, like, kind of sort of living in these structures that favor some and don't favor others. And my concern in the consulting role was that I would be pitching my services to the same power structures that I felt were creating the problems that I wanted to solve, meaning that I had to do the kinds of things that I did in corporate to try to get the dominant group, the white older men who tend to still make up the leadership ranks in most companies, to care about the things that I cared about. And it's not to say that they don't care, but because they have different experiences, it's harder for them.
They may not always understand. Yeah.
They not always understand. So I actually realized that that was the issue. And that's when I decided to go into coaching instead, because my thought was I can work with women who are impacted by these systems, who are wanting to make a bigger impact through the work that they do, and help them navigate those environments or define career paths that are for them, and in completely different contexts that help them build that life that they want. But for me to do that, it really required the last piece of the journey. That was very, very hard for me, which was letting go of this idea that I needed to be some kind of title out in the world, like some kind of prestigious title, and just, kind of going into being, a coach, which I'm very proud of now, but at the time felt very much like, well, is that really going to be something that I feel like is the kind of profession that I had envisioned myself being in. And once I was able to let go of that and get acclimated more into an orientation of service, where I'm here to serve the clients that I have, and serve a greater mission through the work that I do around gender equity and empowerment, that's when I kind of felt like I had turned the corner to really start building that career that I now love so much.
Oh, wow. That's such a beautiful journey. I mean, that you just displayed for us, and all the steps, and even sharing some of the vulnerable moments. So really appreciate you being open and talking us through that, because anyone listening here could be thinking about the next thing that I want to start talking about, which is transitioning. And a career transition can mean a lot of different things, right? And I know that, as you and I were talking about this before we kind of our pre-talk to our show today, was about women in transition in particular. I mean, especially given all the experiences you've had in terms of women in IT, and seeing women in leadership, and not a lot of women in leadership, not having a lot of role models, and then being one of the few role models for many IT leaders and women in IT. But in general, like not even IT, like there's so many sectors, especially in corporate America, where it's so still so homogeneous, right? Like there's the similar kind of and it's still very male dominated. I mean, we're definitely seeing an expansion of other like diversity in a different sense, but I don't know. I don't think we've really made still that many strides in terms of that gender diversity, which then puts sometimes that doubt in many women's minds, right, as they're thinking about where that transition may need to be. So starting off with in terms of this topic with transition, tell us about like women who are transitioning careers. Like you just explained kind of your story. What about like some of the clients you've seen, and how, like, relay any other experience about like a certain client you've had that's been in like a career transition, and kind of like they came to you with X problem, and then where their journey has kind of gone and your impact there.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I actually have thought a lot about this, where women start their journeys with their career transition, and how those journeys can deviate off into so many different directions. I've actually now created avatars or profiles of clients that I work with.
I love that.
Yeah, when I'm talking to clients, potential clients, prospects, I always ask them to self-identify into one of the categories because it helps me to understand like what they want, and then we track that throughout to see how it changes over time. So,
Oh,
the first avatar, I call them the transformers, and these are the women that truly want to basically close the chapter on the career that they've had up until the point that they talk to me, and they want to go in a completely different direction, but they have no idea what that looks like. So they're very much about rebuilding. That was what I would have categorized myself as. The next avatar I call urgent job changers. These are, sorry, let me start with the intentional job changers. The intentional job changers are women who are not getting the kind of impact they want in the work that they have, but they more or less want to stay in the lane that they're in. So they may want to take their experience and skills that they've developed and apply them in a different way. So maybe it's in a different industry or it's a different role context that they want to pursue. And so it's really about teasing out how they can transfer into a different context using a lot of the skills they have. The next are the urgent job changers. And these are women that pretty much need a job as quickly as possible. So many of these women are either in toxic work environments, and they don't have the luxury of taking time off to think about their next move. They could be women who've been laid off and have a financial need to get back to work. So depending on which of those categories they fall in, we look at their career transition in slightly different ways, but we still go through the same steps of exploring what they want to do next, developing a narrative around where they've been and where they're going, and connecting the dots between their past experiences and what they want to offer going forward, so they're compelling to their next employer, or if they want to start their own business, that they have a compelling story about their own business. And then we actually do the third phase, which is the job search, where we look at how they can market themselves into new positions, because quite frankly, the women I work with don't get through the HR systems because they have non-traditional backgrounds for the kinds of jobs they may be looking at. So if you don't have the same job title or the exact experience they're looking for, the chances of you making it through their algorithms and recruiting processes are very small. So I show them how to network and build connections and tell their story in ways that make them compelling. So those are basically the career changer avatars. And then I also work with an avatar or a client profile that I call the climber. And these are women who are in jobs that they aren't interested in leaving, but they're not getting what they want from those jobs. So oftentimes as they've hit an obstacle, they're not getting promoted when they feel ready to be promoted, or they're not being taken seriously in certain contexts, or they feel like they're holding themselves back because they have a fear of being visible, for example. So that would be the other type of client that I work a lot with, is helping them overcome whatever obstacles are in their way in their current environment so they can really thrive in them. And I have lots of stories of clients, and I'll tell you, I'll give you a couple of examples. I had one client who came to me. She was a senior leader in the healthcare industry in IT, and she thought she wanted to just change to a different type of company and a slight change in industry at a higher level. And she ended up becoming a cannabis consultant and starting her own business.
wow.
That was a really fun client. I had a recent client who, the complete opposite, had thought she wanted to completely, change up the job that she had because she was unhappy. And through the process of working together, she realized that where that was coming from was sort of internalized messages that she always needed to be striving for more. And once she realized that those weren't her voices, she took a step back and said, I'm happy with where I am and I want to spend more time with my family.
Nice.
And
Nice.
all of the big grand plans that she presented when we started working together kind of fell away, and she was enjoying the life that she already had. So there's every journey is so individual, and that's why
So yeah, so true, so individual. I want to just summarize a few things I heard. Well, first I'm going to paraphrase of what you just said in terms of how coaching creates that space of awareness. So for your client who realized, oh, I don't want this grandiose plan. I'm actually happy where I am. That's so powerful. Like as she went through that journey to really create that space of awareness, have that self-reflection, and be very content, hopefully, and happy with where she's at. Storytelling. And I love that you mentioned this in terms of how you work with different leaders and women and in transition and thinking about what their story is and accepting it and honoring it and identifying what they've learned from it, right? I think that sometimes it's very natural for many of us to not talk about some of the obstacles or even the failures. And yet that's a lot of as part of our story and our journey. And that's where a lot of that learning can be really powerful and come from. So getting people to think about what is their story, what do they want to be kind of known for, what have they learned along the way, and then finding what that next step is. So as our listeners are out there, paying attention, thinking about, well, what's my career story? What's my career journey? And that's why it's very intentional, even for me, when I'm bringing guests on the show, is like, I want my listeners to hear each guest story, because I think it's important for all of us to kind of understand our own journey, our own story. And well, before I make my next point, if you have any comments to that effect to add on, please.
Oh my gosh, so many comments. So many comments. First of all, 100%, I wildly agree with everything you just said. But I think what's important is that so often women are afraid to own their stories, and that actually can become a significant obstacle in moving ahead. And let me give you an example of that. I work with a lot of women who come to the realization sort of mid-career, so let's say 40s and 50s, that the path that they've been on is not the path for them. But at that time, when they realize that, they've already started to talk themselves out of making a change, because we've all heard the messages that women after a certain age are lucky to even have work because we don't have the skills or experiences that companies want or look for, or that we don't fit the profile of the sort of ambitious young up and comer, kind of current on technology and all of that. And it's that sort of idea that my story is one that will keep me from building the life that I want.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to help people see that, there's a completely different way that your experience and skills can be leveraged and told, so that it actually creates a competitive advantage, if you will. I don't like that term here, but sort of a benefit to the careers and the organizations that they could be working in. So I'll give you an example. Right now, we are going through the most disruptive period in worker history. If you look at the results of the pandemic, the Great Resignation, all of the external politics that affect the workplace, the generational differences around worker priorities, all of those things are creating high levels of disruption in organizations.
A lot of ruckus. A lot of ruckus.
So much ruckus. And yes, and the challenge is that younger workers don't often haven't yet built the experience with going through lots of life challenges and coming back from really significant life events that tend to happen over time. And so some of the most resilient, empathetic, resourceful, scrappy people are people who are older, considered older workers. And so if we start to tell the story that way, that what we bring into these companies are those skills that are so important in 21st century leadership, and by the way, are being actively recruited for by many organizations. They want empathy, they want flexibility, they want resourcefulness, they want resilience. And that tends to come with age and experience for a lot of people. But when we're hiding behind, our age as if it's something that we should be ashamed of, it really affects how we show up and how we communicate, what we can bring to the table. And so when you were mentioning, the importance of story, I so agree with everything that you said, that once you own your story and understand how your story serves other people, that's where you can really start to own the impact that you can have in the world.
Yeah. So, for our listeners out there, if there's anything you take away from today, it's definitely about writing out your story, talking about it, writing it out. Because sometimes also, like, you mentioned this, a part of this, like you tell yourself a story in your head too. That's not always entirely true. And so if you can bring it out to maybe talking about it with someone else, writing it out, really kind of going through the process of describing it, you might be able to identify what are some of those obstacles that are holding you back, or some of that negative talk that's pulling you back, pulling you away from really moving forward and creating that transition that you're looking for. Maybe you're not sure what it is, but you know that something's missing and you want to move forward with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things that breaks my heart in this world more than anything is to think about how many talented, brilliant women there are out there who are holding themselves back because they've bought into a story that they've absorbed from their families, the society, the patriarchy, you name it. And those gifts will never be fully realized because of the ways that we buy into some of these things. And I appreciate the difficult work that it takes to pull the roots out, but it is the most important work I think we can do, not just because we're serving a vision for our own lives, but because we can be of so much service to this world, which, let's just say, it has a lot of intractable problems that I believe women bring really important skills and perspectives and experiences that can go towards solving some of these problems. And yet we may never fully see all of that talent because we're hiding behind our age or our perceived limitations. And that to me is a problem that I want to, try to have a small part in defining differently and shaping in a way that starts to hopefully move things in a better direction.
Well, I think you're handling it in a very big way, because for every one person you touch, there's probably hundreds that they end up impacting and touching as well. So you're exponentially really creating that impact. I want to come back to this concept of networking, because you mentioned that as you were explaining the avatars. And so tying in networking to how critical it is for women in transition. And I'm finding this with quite a few people more and more, especially leaders who have been in maybe only one or two organizations like their whole career. And then, they look at networking as like this marketing word, or like this kind of like a quid pro quo, like you're going to do for me and I'm going to do for you, or like that there has to be this, this even exchange. And the people that self-identify will say, well, I'm too introverted to network. I mean, I'm sure, Kim, you've heard all of that and much more. What do you tell them in terms of the importance of networking and how to do it?
Well, the first thing that I mentioned, and this is where a lot of people also get really where they tend to turn around in the process of going for what they want, is when they start to, reach out, branch out, try to form networks. And in the beginning, for a lot of people, it can be really difficult because they hear the crickets, they're not getting necessarily responses. And it just reinforces what you just mentioned, those beliefs that, hey, this is kind of a an icky process. I'm bothering people. I don't have anything to give them in return. I'm asking for help, but I have nothing to offer. Like all of those ideas, especially, and by the way, there have been studies on this, that women network differently than men because they have some beliefs that have to do with things like, whether they have value to offer in return, or whether, they're using people, or there's some kind of a sleazy element to it. And so the first thing that I do with clients is to start to dig into what are some of the beliefs that they hold that make networking feel so very scary for them. And oftentimes it comes down to a fear of rejection, that, again, these crickets, it's taken personally. It comes down to a fear of not being worthy. Or it comes down to a fear of bothering, like that they're going to be an imposition in some way. And because I am such a big believer in networking, where I tend to start with people is to explain to them that there are lots of people in the world that feel like networking is a waste of time, or that people are imposing on them, or they won't do it because they're not comfortable with it. And you're going to come across those, and that's going to be where you see the crickets, and know that that's just a way that they look at it. It's nothing personal. But what you're trying to do in the networking process is find the group of people who absolutely understand the value of having a network where they're not just taking, but they're also giving. So what I mean by that is that, like, for example, for me, because I had so much help on my own career journey, that I love to pay it forward. So if somebody is behind me in their career journey and they are looking to, learn along the way and have mentors, it feels really great for me to be in that position where I can do that. Now, of course, that's my own belief, and not everybody thinks that way when someone approaches them. But people like me are who you're trying to find when you're networking. The ones that understand that if I help you, it's not necessarily that I expect it to come back to me from you, but it comes back to me in the way that I feel like I'm serving, and that I'm able to, like, to put something out there that's going to be of value, because I've seen that benefit for my own self. And so when I explain that to people, that, you're really looking for one or two impactful people who are going to really get how they can help you in a way that will actually change the trajectory of your own career journey, that's where the magic happens. It's not in you reaching out to 100 people and getting 100 responses. It's you reaching out to 100 people and getting 10 really high quality responses.
And it's not the quantity. This is not about having 1 million Instagram followers. This is about the quality of the person and people you are networking with.
Exactly. And so understanding that those one or two people that make all the difference only happen if you're sending out the 100 requests to find them. And then there's also a process in the job networking process. Like, let's say you are wanting to switch industries and you're trying to find people who will talk to you in that new industry, and all you're doing is getting rejections, like, or crickets, like nobody's responding to you, and you want to give up. The thing that I remind people of is, once you get that, like, one or two people who do talk to you, and then you ask them to introduce you to someone else, and they make a personal introduction, which is much more likely to lead to a call than a cold reach out. And then you start to naturally align with people who are interested in what you're doing and are aligned with what you want to do. And then it's almost like reaching that tipping point that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, where you put in all kinds of effort and then you reach your tipping point, and then it becomes exponentially easier, and you start to really see the fruits of the effort that you don't see in the beginning. So that's how I really work with people around networking. But if you don't know any of that, it just feels like a really uncomfortable process. If you don't understand that there's like this investment and this lead time, and you kind of just getting used to silence and things like that, it can really cause people to like pull back very quickly. And then guess what? They're not going for what they want anymore. And that's again, back to that, I really, lament the fact that we have so much of that right now, where people just hold themselves back because of what they how they interpret the things that are happening around them.
Yeah, like get started. And even if you get that one rejection, it's okay. Keep moving, keep trying through it. I would say one of the, well, I don't really have regrets, but if my 40s self could have talked to my 20s self, I would have opened for example, my LinkedIn account much before I did. Because I worked in the University of California system, I worked in the same institution, same kind of system for so long. I didn't really understand the value of networking. I kind of naturally did it a little bit here and there, but here was a tool that could have helped me stay connected with people that left, or people I would meet at conferences, or other people in academia and in academic healthcare and administrative structures. And I didn't really value it. So I had to start kind of from scratch when I was starting my business, in terms of thinking about, okay, there's different ways of networking. I can go through my personal network. I can go through my professional network. Oh, where is my professional network? Oh, are they on my phone? Do I have their numbers? Oh, I don't really have everyone's numbers. And then I went on LinkedIn, for example, and found one of the first bosses I ever worked for. And I hadn't talked to him in 20 years. And it was such a powerful connection to reconnect that way. And it really took me a while. I had my younger 20-something-year-old cousins who actually pulled my LinkedIn profile together for me one day, because I was so hesitant to do it.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm not saying LinkedIn is the catch-all and that's the way to do it. It is a avenue, but this concept of get started wherever.
Absolutely. Yeah. And LinkedIn actually is the core, like kind of at the center of the networking approaches that I teach my clients, because exactly like you said, it is such a powerful tool. And guess what? People are on LinkedIn to network.
Yeah.
So you're actually going into an environment where people are generally speaking more open to that, especially if you come across people who are posting a lot. And are active. There are some, like what you described, that have been in companies for a long time and they're not necessarily on the platform all that much, or they may, not be so open to connecting with others. But there are so many people out there that are willing to connect just on you sending an invitation with a brief introduction saying,
Totally.
Hey, both
Yeah.
are interested in this. And one thing that you mentioned that I didn't stress, but I think is a really, really important point, is when you're in transition, is reaching out to some of those powerful contacts that you've had over the course of your career, and just get kind of warm up that connection that might have gone cold, because you never know in that where that could go. And this is something that I talk a lot to my clients about too, is when you are through your transition, keep your network warm. In other words, don't wait till you are looking for a job to reach out to people, because then you're gonna feel that sense of like, oh, they're gonna know I'm only reaching out because I want something. But there are so many ways to keep your connections warm. You can like their posts. You can send them a happy birthday note when LinkedIn tells you it's their birthday.
Yeah.
You can send them a thank you for, like, with your boss. You could, your old connection from 20 years ago, you could send him a thank you of what the impact that he had when he did this, when you work together, and how that's influenced your leadership. Those things go a long way. So, also for those of your listeners that aren't necessarily looking for a career transition, just putting time, 5-10 minutes a day into networking can really help you have a network there when you need them. Rather than having, like many of my clients, like what you described, of people who aren't on LinkedIn virtually at all, who are then having to build a network from scratch, more or less. And I see a lot of, and that's doable work, but it's hard work too.
It is. I mean, it definitely was a couple of months of very intentional, many hours of work towards building that. Along with networking and in what you were just describing, I was thinking of this other leadership skill that it really helps when you're thinking about networking, is you're really relationship building. And I think more and more, as we're thinking about 21st century leadership, I love that you use that term. We're looking at less of the influential leaders and more of the relationship builders that I really think are going to grow in the ranks of leadership. And this is where women have a huge advantage. because it tends to come a little bit more natural to them. And I know you're in strengths coaching, as I am, and we have 4 leadership domains. Most leaders are either influencers, so they have that command control style, really lean into a little bit more of competition, easier to delegate. They're very comfortable with risk. Then the second type is the executors, the ones that want to do it on their own. They want to get things done. Why give it to someone else when they can do it themselves? That the third is strategic thinkers, the ones that come up with a lot of the innovative, creative ideas. They naturally gravitate towards leadership positions that allow them to have more of that real strategic time. And then the fourth is the relationship builders, the ones traditionally in leadership structures, especially in the executive ranks and the C-suite ranks, we didn't see as much, but we're seeing come up more and more. And so when I think about networking, I relate it to relationship building. If you can think about it even in that context, it may also help you think about it from a different perspective. So to your point of, keeping your contacts warm, keeping those connections warm, it's about relationship building at the end of the day.
It's such an important point. And if you look at what's really behind the Great Resignation, it's not like the Great Resignation came from nowhere or was, sprung up suddenly as a result of the pandemic. Workers have been feeling very disenfranchised with their workplaces for a number of years, if not decades or longer. And the shift that really has been happening is that the pandemic has prompted a lot of people to think differently about what's important in their lives and to really question the things that we've been told we should prioritize.
Yeah.
Productivity, having a great job, sucking it up, because
loyalty, like undying loyalty. I mean, I know that's a whole other topic, but yeah.
Yeah, and this idea that work is not a means to an end, but work is the end in and of itself, and we should all have the dream job because our lives should be built around work, right? Like a lot of those values really got challenged under the pandemic. And what we hear employees who are leaving their jobs for something better say is that they're tired of being treated like a cog in the wheel and like they're not humans, that they're actually units of productivity that get treated as such. And so to your point on relationship building, so many workers just want to work for a company that treats them like they're human beings with lives and with emotions. God forbid we should have emotions, or we should have, things that require our attention outside of work, or that we should, be who we are versus the model of what the company thinks we should be. All of those things require the kinds of leaders that you pointed to that are very strong in relationship building skills. Very interestingly, Gartner, I was at a Gartner seminar at the beginning of the year where they talked about the new leadership mandate of the 21st century. And the 4 traits of leadership that they mentioned, and note that nowhere did they mention risk-taking and confidence and technical skills. They mentioned empathy, they mentioned flexibility, they mentioned well-being, and they mentioned coaching. So they actually mentioned, the leaders of the 21st century, they put empathy on the list. I mean, these are, can you imagine, in the 20th century, that being anywhere on a leadership list? And why is that so important? Why is empathy so important? Well, empathy helps us see the perspectives of other people. It helps us to walk in their shoes. And through that process, we can start to really get at what people are looking for, not only in their lives or in their work, but also in their lives overall. And when we understand that and we can be cognizant of it in how we approach the work that they do, it creates levels of engagement and performance and loyalty that companies are looking for now, and that's eluding them. So to your point, all of these skills that women bring, relationship building and empathy being at the top of the list, this is really the time for women to emerge in a leadership capacity where we can balance out all of the, the more traditionally coveted aspects of leadership, like, technical skills and, that command and control and managing resources and, sort of pushing outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. That was like so inspirationally said. And I think it's really the perfect conclusion for our show today, quite frankly, because you summarized it so well, those attributes of the 21st century leader that are more and more going to be valued over what was traditionally valued before. And especially that empathy is going to continue to be more and more coveted versus what it was before. And so for any women listening, as well as anyone else listening who is really thinking about, women in their lives or women in the workforce that are around them, really like valuing some of those natural attributes that women in leadership can really bring. And hopefully that helps to motivate and inspire and push someone on their transitional journey. Kim, any last words, any last thoughts as we close up today?
Yeah, I love this conversation so much. And I'm just going to use your last comment to really dot the I that we were saying earlier, which is owning our stories, right? It used to be that if we were seen as empathetic or someone who cared about their workers or who listened and collaborated, that was seen as a negative, like we weren't strong leaders or what have you. And, so we would tend to keep those parts of ourselves hidden. So really embracing that as part of our story and the strengths that we have, I think like you said, is a great place for us to wrap up our conversation.
Love it. Thank you, Kim, so much for being on our show, Leaders Creating Ruckus. It's been a pleasure talking to you. How do people find you if they want to talk more, connect more, network with you, Kim?
Oh, wonderful. I would love that. And by the way, thank you so much, Aashi, for having me. It's always so much fun talking to you. I know we could probably go on for another 5 hours.
We'll have you back on the show, Kim, for sure. There are so many topics, especially in cultural anthropology, I would love to explore a little bit more with you.
I look forward to it. You can find me at KimJonesAlliance.com and on my LinkedIn at Kimberly, KIMBERLEES Jones. And I look forward to any questions that any of your listeners have about any of the topics that we talked about today.
Yeah, and I would love to add to that LinkedIn plug. I mean, if another great takeaway from today could be open up your LinkedIn account or, dust off if your LinkedIn account's older, or if you already have it active, go ahead and connect with either Kim or I or both of it, and we will accept your request. You just put us a little note in that you listen to us on Ruckus Avenue Radio, and we'd love to connect with you.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Kim. This is Aashi Arora for Leaders Creating Ruckus. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.